Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome to Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Friday, November 1st, and Grayson and I have a special episode for each of you today. We all know that Baylor's honoring the 2013-2014 Big 12 Championships champions this weekend, football championship teams, and we thought it was appropriate to go back, look at all the games, come up with our top 5 games for that era, rank them, starting with 5, going to 1. We agreed on the 5 games, but we don't know where we're going with the rankings of these. So it's going to kind of give and take. And I'll have Grayson start us off with number 5. But before we get there, I want to ask you, Grayson, I know you were a student around that time. I was out of school, right out of school, and our perceptions are a little bit different. I think the rankings of these will probably showcase that a little bit. But what do you remember from that era of Baylor football in 2013, 2014? Obviously, we can talk about the offense, but is there anything that really just stands out to you about that time of Baylor football?
Right. So I was a student. 2012 was my freshman year. So I had the Nick Florence experience, didn't have the RG3 experience, but then I also had both Big 12 championships. And then, of course, Seth Russell's year in 2015 was my senior year, unfortunately. What could have been something really crazy in 2015, but obviously that's not what we're primarily talking about in this one. But I think the thing that really just stuck out to me during this era was how much Baylor had changed over the course of literally, I don't even like 8 months, like from the middle of that 2012 season to 2013, 2014. It was like, man, these guys have just completely figured it out offensively. And then they play so physical, play so hard, talk so much trash. Like there was just something unique about that team. There was this vibe of like, oh, we're not just going out there to win. We're going out there to beat you by 70. And they did that a lot. And so I felt like that was kind of the thing that stood out most. I think going into 2013, for instance, like it was one of those things where it's like, you're losing Nick Florence. And so who is Bryce Petty type thing? And then, of course, it turns out Bryce Petty ends up being, arguably the best quarterback in Baylor history, aside from RG3, like, especially with what he's accomplished. And so that's kind of what I remember. It was fun because I was a student. So my perspective is different. It was just this crazy, glorious time of like, I get to Baylor and the football program just is on this crazy rise. So that's the main thing I remember from it.
Yeah. So I was there, and to put it in perspective, I had a class with Robert Griffin. It was an economics class, I think like Texas economics or something like that. And it was his freshman year. And so that was 2008. And I remember him getting a standing ovation coming in class after he beat Texas A&M in his freshman year in 2008. And so that was kind of like the start of the climb, right? Like from that, I remember that vividly. Robert was a good dude. He sat 2 seats over from me. Like we had a relationship that was brief, but we knew each other. We knew who each other were. I doubt he remembers me now, other than just media stuff. But, it was like that was the rise. But then you get to 2000, he's gone. You get to 2012, Nick's there. Then it's 13, 14. Like it's like that climb to those moments. And you hit it. Like no one really knew. It's like, all right, you lose Nick Florence. You've lost Robert Griffin. Can you replicate this again?
Yeah.
And that was the question mark. And they were, it was Art Briles. That was the team. That was his program. That was his team. And that offense absolutely, from after Nick Florence, they figured out the rushing game. They figured out the rushing attack. Obviously, Lake Seastrunk on the 2013 team. And that offense went to another level. Not that it wasn't in 2011, but you talk about Phil Bennett being there as a defense coordinator at this time. The defense is elevating. They're signing guys on the defensive side of the ball. And it just immediately went from a good story to a very good program.
Right. And Colt, the crazy part is, and nowadays it just doesn't quite work like this. Like Petty was old when he started, when he got his first start. And I remember in the early days, not early days of Sikkim 365, but 2018, like before the transfer portal started, there were so many people that were like, let's just develop quarterbacks like our Bryles did. Like, why is Charlie Brewer playing? Like, there should be this pipeline of quarterbacks. And unfortunately, you know, that hasn't really been the case for Baylor. It's been kind of this interchanging parts aside for Charlie Brewer, but he had to start as a true freshman. And so it's very interesting in that time because, you know, it's just getting to the point where it was like Seth Russell was going to be your starting quarterback in 2015. And then you finally signed, you know, another top recruit, the first one since RG3 that you were anticipating could play really early. But it's just like this shift in philosophies and just how the game is honestly played and recruited nowadays.
Yeah, and if you look at Nick Florence and Bryce Petty, I don't remember if Nick did it, but I believe Bryce did. He was a gray shirt, which I don't even know if you remember what a gray shirt is.
Yeah.
But a gray shirt being you don't even do anything for a full semester of school. You're not counted towards the recruiting class, and then you just show up on campus and you're on the football team. And so, like, that was a deal then. You start doing that with quarterbacks, and you're talking about really old dudes. Now, Baylor has a quarterback this year in Sawyer Robertson. This is his first year starting as a junior, so very similar in that regard, but he did play a lot last year. So really cool times, and we want to revisit these games. And every single one of you are going to know about these games, these 5 games, prominent moments in those 2 seasons. But let's start with number 5, Grayson. I want you to jump into this. We don't know what each other's rankings are for these games, but we know what the games are. So I want you to start with number 5, and we're going to work down through this list. So get us rolling on this one.
Okay, so number 5 is kind of it's a bittersweet memory because it's kind of these 2 converging paths that just came together because it's like Baylor's 2014 year. There's all this momentum towards trying to make a college football playoff. And Baylor goes into the last game of the year versus a top 10 Kansas State team in McLean Stadium. They go out, handle business. Yeah, you know, they didn't completely rout Kansas State, but they beat up on Kansas State. They won by double digits. They were up pretty much the whole game. And so they come through with this huge win. And at the same time, you know, you're checking your phone to see, you know, what's Ohio State doing? What's Kansas or what's TCU doing? But I just remember it being just this great moment where Baylor goes back-to-back, storming the field, you know, got to be out on the field again, which there's another game that we're going to get to where you're out on the field and getting to celebrate that moment at McLean Stadium, which isn't where they celebrated their first Big 12 championship. So it was a unique environment in that regard as well. But then it's just that path of like, is Baylor going to be in the college football playoff? Is this actually going to happen? Like, are they going to be the number 4 seed? And I personally think at the time, there was a very realistic chance of that happening, even though, of course, Ohio State, you know, goes and plays Wisconsin, and Wisconsin basically gets told like, hey, man, you need to lose by 1,000 points in this game. Like, we need Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. That's what it felt like. They won like 59-0, played their starters in the 4th quarter up like by 1 million. So yeah, just that memory really stands out to me because it was like Baylor was so close to being not just at the top of the Big 12, but potentially at the top of the sport.
Yeah, it was. And that was the first year of the college football playoff. And if you make it that year, like, it's kind of like you set the precedent for the rest of the, you know, for the forthcoming years, like whatever you do in that year. And Baylor was so close. And obviously TCU was close, and Baylor had the early season victory over TCU, which I'm sure is obviously on both of our lists. I'm curious where yours is, but you know, that was not my number 5. I think, and I'll get to it and to the number where it is on my list in a few minutes. But the reason it's not that low is because it had a championship implication, and I wanted that to be higher for mine. And so for number 5 for me, and I'm going back and forth on how exactly I should approach this because I'm going to give up one of yours. But number 5 for me is the 2014 OU game. It's in Norman, and I have that at number 5 because there was not a lot riding on the game in terms of what the eventual result be. I mean, obviously you have to win that game to win a Big 12 championship, but it was kind of that in-between game, almost like a lot of people expected Baylor to win that, but it was also, they struggled against West Virginia, lose that game on the road. They beat Kansas, and then everybody's like, what about the West Virginia game? What about the Kansas game? Well, no, Bryce Petty was just ready for Oklahoma, right? Mm-hmm. That was the ready for Oklahoma moment. And if you're going to win another Big 12 championship, you're going to have to do it on that particular game. And that's why it was so valuable, because like, if you don't win that game, then you're not going to win a Big 12 championship because you've already lost to West Virginia on the road. And so it's kind of an in-between, and that's why I have it at number 5. And that was the Bryce Petty. If you remember the game, it was Bryce Petty, Corey Coleman. Like, Bryce completed like 30 passes, 15 of them were to Corey Coleman. Oklahoma had 0 answer, and it was just like almost just like, well, we can't really stop you, so we're just going to like get in your way. That's what Oklahoma did in that game. And it took them a little while to get going. But I think what it did in that game, what Bryce Petty did, he set the tone for that game. Now, everybody remembers the press conference clip. They're like, just ready for OU, just ready for OU. And he set the tone in that press conference for that week. And it took a little while to get that going in the game. Like, it was kind of back and forth early, but then once Baylor got on a roll, they played with an attitude that propelled them for the rest of the season. And so I think that it set up the Big 12 championship, but it didn't win the Big 12 championship, which is why it's not higher on the list for me.
So I definitely understand that. I think my perspective on that game, which is going to be number 4 on my list, so it's pretty easy to just kind of transition into number 4 for me with that game. And so here's why I have it ahead of that game, ahead of the Kansas State game, because Baylor had never gone on the road and won in Norman ever, and Oklahoma was a top 15 team in that game. I felt like that was the game where it was like, is this team for real or not? And they went in there and they didn't just say, oh yeah, Baylor's for real. I mean, this is legitimately a team that can go win back-to-back Big 12 championships. I also think that was the game that gave Baylor a chance to make the college football playoff as well. And I think it's the game that should have put them in to the college football playoff. But of course, you don't get to have that performance on the last weekend. So, you know, people say this and that. Oklahoma was down that year, whatever people want to say. But I think it was very memorable for a lot of reasons. There was a ton of motivation around it, like you said, with Bryce Petty during his press conference, where it's just like not really answering questions, just like, you know, ready for OU, ready for OU.
That's all the focus. That was
it. Yeah, laser focus on it. And I mean, they went in there and they blitzed Oklahoma. You had the Bryce Hager. I think he had like a pick 6 in that game as well. That was early on, and
might have got some of the time. I think it was like inside the 5. I don't think it was a pick 6, but it was close. I got really close.
Right.
Scores. Yeah.
You had Sean Oakman just completely blowing people up. I know he hit Trevor Knight, I believe, in that game as well. And Trevor unfortunately got hurt. But you know, they played with this physicality and this fire in that game. And that game just stands out to me as just like that might have been the best performance of the Browse era. That's like how much I thought about that game.
Yeah, it definitely was. And you know, that it proved that the West Virginia game to a great extent was a fluke. Now, the West Virginia game ultimately kept them out of the college football playoff because they lost that game in a game. You know, it was a talented West Virginia team, but it wasn't a team that Baylor should have lost to. So that's what kept them out. But that game against Oklahoma proved that game was ultimately a fluke in my mind. And then obviously it propelled the rest of the season and led them to a Big 12 championship. So through number 5, I want you to go to number 4, and I'm going to have you lead the way on all of these because they're going to be off a little bit. But I want you to start with number 4 on this.
Yeah, I mean, that was my number 4. So that was it right there. Yeah, so we're good with mine. I'm curious what yours is because, I mean, I'm curious how high you put my number 5 game.
Yeah, well, yeah. And it's different. I took a little multiple different approaches to this, but depending on the game and what it meant to me, and I think that's where it's going to go back. So this one's going to probably upset a lot of people that it's this low, and you're probably already thinking, but it's 61-58. I put it at number 4, and it's a 2014 game, and dude, like you cannot replicate the amount of emotions and the ups and downs of that game. You're never going to be able to do it. And the emotions of that game are what people hang on to, right? Like it was a massive win. Like you beat TCU, it sets you up for the rest of the season. All of these things happen, but then the next week you lose West Virginia, all that, you know, that sucked. But the emotions and the ups and downs and that game epitomized Baylor TCU in that stretch. 2011, 2012, which TCU blew out Baylor in 2012, 2013, 14, even 15, the back and forth game. Like this game was the epitome of that stretch of football. And you talk about TCU getting up early, Baylor battling back, TCU extending it again. It was just this roller coaster of like, keep climbing. And TCU goes up 21 points. And I remember seeing visibly, and it's in the fourth quarter, and you see people start getting up from their seats after the pick 6. But literally before you could get out of your section, they have the pick 6. And with less than a minute that comes off the clock, Baylor has already scored a touchdown. So everybody's like, okay, we're leaving. Oh, wait, hold on. No, maybe we're not. That's how quick it changed. And from that point, Baylor goes on, scores 24 unanswered points and wins that game with the walk-off field goal by Chris Callahan. And, man, I love the game. absolutely love the game. I can't put it higher than 4 though. I couldn't come to know what I knew about the rest of the games and what they meant to me and what was on the line. I couldn't put it higher than that. But yeah, phenomenal game. And I think there's a lot of people, or a handful of people, that left that game that are probably always thought, what the heck? Why did I leave that game? And there's a lot of people who did leave that game that tell people, no, I didn't leave. But yeah, phenomenal football game. The atmosphere was incredible. And obviously in McLean Stadium, that was the first epic game at McLean Stadium, the 2014 season.
Right. And that game was a big one. It holds a special place in my heart for sure. It's going to be ranked higher, so I'll talk about it for me more as we get there. But it definitely was a very special game for me, as was my number 3. So my number 3 game here is a game that there's something special about a blackout environment at Floyd Casey against a team that you have really struggled against. And it's like, is this the moment where you again show that you're for real? And Baylor blew out Oklahoma in 2013 in front of just one of the, I'm not even going to say one of, I think it was probably the best crowd ever that I've ever been a part of, even better than 61-58. Because like you said, I think people were uneasy most of that game and leaving. Whereas this one, it was like, Baylor was up for most of the game. It was close for a little bit, and then Baylor just started to extend the lead and extend the lead. And you're just sitting there in disbelief. They're about to beat Oklahoma by 30. Like, it was just one of those crazy moments. I feel like that was another moment where I look at it and go, okay, this is really like, this program has something really special because most programs, I would almost say no programs beat Oklahoma like Baylor did, especially during that time period.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a good game. Great atmosphere. Crazy thing. I'll get to mine in a minute, but crazy thing about that game, Baylor led that game 3-2. Like in the second quarter, Oklahoma goes up 5-3 late. It's like 7 minutes to go in the second quarter.
Yeah.
Baylor scores its first touchdown with 7 minutes roughly to go, and then the floodgates open. Baylor just dominates that game. And so these are one of the last games that I really remember before. Like, I did stuff in recruiting, and I did stuff covering Baylor and just kind of back and forth right out of school, not really sure what I was going to do. And I was sitting with my family, and there's an Oklahoma fan sitting behind me and a group of them. And it's like, it's early, and it's like kind of back and forth. And dude, they were talking so much trash. And so like, it was just that, and I was still pretty young. These guys were probably late 30 or late 20s, early 30s. So older than me, but not too old. And the entire game, first half, they were just kind of going back and forth bickering. And I remember when that game got up and they just kind of started to run their mouths a little bit more. But that was the first moment of kind of like, okay, like this is survivable. This is like, Baylor's going to continue to win because of this game. Like, you look at the 2011 season, they won 9 games regular season, and they did the things that they did, but no one knew if Baylor could take that next step. That game made Baylor relevant on a national landscape, and then obviously propelled them throughout the rest of that season. So good. Yeah. A great atmosphere. It's a little bit higher on my list. So
yeah. And Colt, one thing I'll also say about this game is it's really fascinating because you beat Oklahoma really bad, and then Oklahoma at the end of the year saves your season. Because people, I think, forget about this a little bit, but Baylor goes in, obviously gets destroyed by Oklahoma State. We know the whole story there. But then last week of the year in Bedlam, OU's like, here you go, Baylor. You won a Big 12 championship. We'll do that for you. I think it was Sterling Shepard had just an awesome game, and they end up winning in crazy fashion. They beat Oklahoma State, which gives Baylor a share of the Big 12 championship.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool, obviously, atmosphere there. And my number 3 actually goes back to your number 5. And because of the implications of this game, another Big 12 championship, the game against Kansas State, Baylor beating Kansas State in McLean Stadium, final game of the season. And what I wanted to emphasize on this one, Baylor started off, that game was 14-0. If that game continues at that pace, and it looked like there was a chance that it would, but then Kansas State, typical with Kansas State, Bill Snyder just kind of like stayed in it. But Baylor got off to a fast start. And I always think, and I always wonder, like, if Baylor goes on to win that game 45-13, 45-14 after starting off 14-0. Does that mean Ohio State doesn't make that jump because Baylor has a almost equally impressive victory as what Ohio State did? But they kind of they don't say they let off the gas, but Kansas State just did what they did to make that keep it from being a blowout. Bryce Petty, 34 of 40 for 412 yards. I mean, that was just really, for beating a number 9 team, almost just a mundane performance. Like, almost expected. I don't know what the line was going in that game, but it was just almost like, okay, yeah, we beat number 9. Now we're more worried about the college football playoff, as you were talking about earlier. That's what the focus was. I remember we stayed in a hotel that night, getting up, leaving to go home, and all we were doing was listening to the radio to wait on the rankings to come out. And then obviously they come out later that night or whenever it was later that
in the
afternoon.
morning. In the morning, right?
Yeah, it might have been in the morning, and Baylor's number 5. They leapt TCU. Ohio State jumps from wherever they were all the way to the front, and rightfully so. They end up winning the national championship, but deflating, because if you think we beat number 9, we win a Big 12 championship, we do it pretty handily. Yeah, we're in now. Like, TCU's not going to be in there ahead of us. Who's going to be in there ahead of us? Well, then here comes Ohio State, and that was devastating. I mean, that as good as that game was, it was devastating that next morning, realizing that you're not making the playoff.
Right. You had this amazing moment where you're just like in the stadium on the field cheering, celebrating a Big 12 championship. And then it's like the next morning you're getting leapfrogged by Ohio State. And then you're also looking forward to, like last year, for instance, Florida State loses their quarterback and they're left for dead after going undefeated. And then this one-loss Ohio State team with their third string quarterback, you're just like, oh yeah, they deserve to be in the college football playoff. And you're just like, are you kidding me? Like, you can't write this. And then of course now there's a 12-team playoff, which Baylor would have been in like 4 or 5 times. So yeah, it's all a little disappointing, all a little, tough to cope with.
The CFP has been very elusive with Baylor. I mean, you talk about the 14 game, 13, maybe they're in it. If there's 1 in 13, I don't know where the rankings were, but then you talk about 14, 15, Baylor's looking like flying high with Seth Russell. Anyways, that's a whole nother story. But yeah, it's been very elusive. 19, obviously 21. If you have a 12-team playoff, you're in it. But yeah, it's kind of, that game epitomized that. It's like Baylor's been right there on the brink multiple times and weren't able to make it in. So with that, what's your number 2?
All right, number 2 is this is going to go back to, I believe, your number 4, right? And it's TCU, the TCU game in 2014, 61-58. So this one holds a pretty special place for me. So my cousin went to TCU and was actually an athletic trainer for TCU. And I went down on the field and talked to him before the game. And we were just talking before the game started. And I was like, what do you think about this one? He's like, oh, we're going to blow y'all out. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, y'all haven't played anybody. Like, we're going to blow y'all out. Like, he was very matter of fact on it. And the game starts and it's like this high scoring affair going back and forth, but you're in the fourth quarter and you're down by 21 points. I'm like, wow. Was he right? Like, dang, they're pretty good. They're better than I thought they were. Holy cow. And then of course, I got my friends and they're like, 1 or 2 of them are like, I want to leave. And I'm like, no, we're not going anywhere. And like you said, they scored really quickly. Everyone started to change their momentum. The vibes changed after that first touchdown. And then they scored again. And then you have the epic call where it's like on the 100th play of the game, Bryce Petty links up with Corey Coleman in the corner of the end zone for a touchdown to tie the game at 58. You have the Ryan Reed play on Josh Doxson that obviously gets Baylor the ball back, gives them a chance to go down. Chris Callahan makes field goal, storm the field, complete storming of the field. Incredible moment against a team that, like, you look back on the year and you're like
pretty good,
pretty dang good. Like, TCU was really good that year. And also it's one of those things where you look back on and go, man, I wish Baylor and TCU had gotten to play each other again for a spot in the college football playoff in a Big 12 championship. And I really do. I think who wouldn't have wanted that in college football? Like, everyone would have wanted that moment. And so that's another thing where you're like, man, I wish they would have had a Big 12 championship. And then also I wish the Big 12 commissioner, Bob Bowlesby, wasn't just the craziest commissioner on earth and is like doing this whole thing where he's like, we're not going to recognize one true champion. And it's like,
promoted it the entire season.
Yeah. And it's like, dude, hey man, like you need a team to make the college football playoff. So why don't you just go ahead and back the team that won the head-to-head game? So that made completely no sense once again.
Yeah.
And so
And
this had a
both
lot of
teams
controversy on
missed
it.
it, and both teams
Yeah.
missed the playoff because of that. The Big 12 takes another step back in general. And yeah, that was I couldn't have looking back, I couldn't imagine if Texas and Oklahoma had played a game like that. They're your two potential champions for the league, and the team that won the head to head, like, no, you're not really the champion.
Yeah.
Like we're like, what are we doing here? But that's Baylor TCU. We're like, oh, we're going to try to get two teams in. No, you're not. Like, you're just not honoring a champion. And so I remember that very frustrating moments. And obviously Baylor fans remember that very well. And I think that game, there was a lot on it, right? But this one, this is my number two is there's not a lot on it. And I felt this way when we were talking about it on yours, and it's the blackout game versus Oklahoma. And it's 2013, and like Baylor had some decent atmospheres. That like even in 2012, the game over number one Kansas State, not a lot of people there. I mean, like it was at McLean, I mean at Floyd Casey, like it was like there just wasn't a lot of people there. And you think that the atmospheres leading up to that game against Oklahoma would have been much better. There were some during the Robert Griffin season, like the final game against Texas, where Robert comes out and says, "Hey, we're going to win I think we just won our first Heisman Trophy," which they ultimately did. But there had not been that key moment for the fan base of we can take it to the next level. That game was that moment. It was electric. And everybody, I think black uniforms, for example, like people relate that atmosphere to what Baylor, the black uniforms, to the high pace offense. It's like you want to replicate that, but the issue is that was the absolute perfect storm for everything. Night game, you're playing Oklahoma, you have a really good team. Like it just happened the way that it did, and you cannot replicate that. But I think what it did is it set the standard for Baylor. It's like, this is what Baylor fans of our generation is going to remember, right? Like it's going to be, we remembered that atmosphere. Let's get back to that. It set the bar. And that's why it's my number two, because I think what it showed was that Baylor fans absolutely can do that. And we talk about it this weekend with the TCU game. You're trying to do a blackout and get this momentum going. And obviously circumstances are much different. It's not two top 25 teams, two top 10 teams roughly. But it's still like, let's figure out how to get back to that. And that game set the bar for me. And then obviously throw the win on top of it. The Oklahoma team ended up being pretty good, as you mentioned. And yeah, that's why it's number two. Even though it didn't have anything that really hinged on the season, it kind of took the program up a notch for me.
Right. I think it answered the question of, what's the ceiling, right? Like, can Baylor compete on a national level? And can Baylor win a game like this where they're not necessarily the underdog? And winning the one in 2011 RG3's Heisman year, that was great, and that was an amazing moment for sure. But it was more kind of about individual type, him winning the Heisman, and this team, they were good, but they weren't winning a national championship. They weren't contending for that. This team was 7-0, 8-0 coming into this game, number 6 in the nation. And you got number 10 Oklahoma coming into your house, who's just ran the Big 12 for years. And you don't just beat them. I mean, you smoke them. And it was an amazing moment. I still probably to this day would say it's the best atmosphere I've ever been to for a Baylor game. I don't, there's been some other good ones for sure. And like, honestly, 2019 versus Oklahoma was one of the better ones at McLean.
Yeah, but it was a day game. There's those factors that limited it. And but I'm with you. Like, you can't beat that atmosphere. Like, there was nothing that could come close because of the perfect storm that it led to it.
Right. And I think 2019 was a night game, though, versus Oklahoma, the Jalen Hurts game. I think it was a night game.
2019.
Game
yes.
day.
No. Yeah, you're right. That was a good atmosphere. Baylor gets out big. I was thinking about the 21 game. That was a day game. So you're right. You're right on that. You're right on that one.
Right. Very different. But this one held just this special place for the environment because, the one we're going to get to here in a second, like, it was during the day. And so it's just different. When you get a night game like this, the environment was crazy. Everyone wanted to beat Oklahoma. You're taking your program to this next level. Just really, really special moment, and one that I'll never forget, being that I was a student there.
Yeah. No, you if you were there, especially, you won't forget it. And even going back and watching that game on replay, you see that atmosphere. And it was like they'd show the cameras would show the students from like the bottom level up. And it was just like Baylor, like we know, like it's not the biggest university. There's not a ton of students, but that particular game, it was, if 95% of the students that were enrolled at Baylor weren't at that game, I would be surprised. It was slammed. Like it was like there was nowhere for me to move. And what you experienced that, and being a blackout made it that much better. But you're right. So we're on to number one. We got to get off this number two, but we're on to number one. And everybody knew that this game, in my mind at least, you probably figured out this one was going to be number one. So much. I mean, like you talk about everything that you could circle. The issue was that it was freezing freaking cold. And case closed, Big 12 championship over Texas, first Big 12 championship. So it's number one. It's over Texas. It's the last game of this. I mean, like there's just so many things that go into this game, except you're driving. I'm driving from Tyler, and it's below, it's like freezing, whatever, like literally 0 degrees. Everything's ice. It took us like 6 hours to drive from Tyler to Waco. It's like, and you see everybody driving, you're like, why are we doing this? Like, but everybody's there, and they slam pack it. Baylor wins the Big 12 championship. That's the number one by far. The only thing that could have made it different is if you have a normal December day where it's 60 degrees, not 30, and you can imagine what that environment would have been like.
Man, 30s being generous. I remember it being like 5 degrees out there. I've never been so cold in my life. And there is so many memorable moments for me about this game. Like I get to the tailgate. I was, a college kid, not prepared for this weather. I'm like, I got to go to Dollar General and get some of these like dollar gloves just to wear something at this game. So I go do that before the game as I'm, it's like 7 a.m. because we're out there ready to tailgate. You drive into Floyd, you're parking on that dirt field that is covered in ice. Basically, you're walking through the tailgate scene and, going and doing that whole thing. And then, my now wife, obviously she wasn't my wife at the time. She was like, I can't, I can't, I got to go. And so her and her friends left, and you're exactly right. So the atmosphere kind of gets, dragged down a little bit because people are just like freezing, not as loud as they normally are. I basically found that I just needed to keep cheering because that was the only way I was going to just stay relatively warm during this game. And I just think like there was so much in this. I think people forget that if Texas wins this game, they get a share of the Big 12 championship. Texas had a lot to play for in this game, and it was close. Like it was close for
3 at half.
Yeah. So really, really close for a stretch. And then Baylor obviously pulls away in the second half. You have the, was it KJ Morton pick six?
Should have been pick six. Called it back, but should have been.
Because he taunted at the end, but picked off Case McCoy. I mean, just like this was the culmination of everything. Baylor winning a Big 12 championship and my sophomore year. And I'm sure for like older Baylor fans, this game probably has even more just more of a push to it than even for me, because I didn't grow up a Baylor fan. So I was just like a student. So it was incredible. But for people who had to like suffer through what Baylor went through for a long time in there to get back to this point, I'm sure that there's just a different kind of vibe to this game. But I loved it. It was phenomenal. Rush the field, case closed. You have the lights going out in there. Everything about that moment was just simply perfect.
Yeah. So to frame this for me, my dad played ball at Baylor, and we grew up going to games, and he would go and let us sit in the end zone, when I was young, and they're playing Texas, and I wanted to go to the game, and he was like, why are we going to this game? I'm going to take you, but I don't really want to go because Texas is really good, and we're not. Like, there's so many things, and we're on our way, and it's the game where Cedric Benson gets suspended because he steals a TV. Or something happens, and he that was a legit story. And I remember telling my dad, I was like, "Oh, their best players out. Like, I'm young enough, I'm still naive. I'm like, their best players out. We're gonna win this game." So we go and we sit in the end zone, and it's like, I don't know, 56-7. Like it wasn't even that close. And I remember leaving thinking, "Dang, that was not good." But then it's like fast forward. Now it's 2013, and like those emotions for me were like, man, I remember when this wasn't even a realm of possibility. Like 56-7 was it. Like if you kept it within 20, that was it. So those moments were massive. But to put this game in perspective, it was so cold. Baylor still put up 508 yards in that game. Antoine Goodley had a one-handed touchdown pass catch that he had. Like as cold as I was, and I think you're right. We showed up. We're like, we tailgate, right? So we have our canopies and everything. And I'm like, yeah, we'll get some tarps and put them up over the side, and we'll get a heater in here. And like, dude, like 5 minutes into this thing, I'm like back in the car trying to heat it up. It's not heating up. Like it's freezing cold. The entire family's there. We're sitting there. Like, you never sit down though. Like, students absolutely never sit down anyways, unless it's halftime. But even the alumni side, like even all the rest of the stadium, nobody's sitting down, because if you sit down, you're going to freeze the bleachers. Like It was that cold. And then obviously that metal is just, that was miserable if you even tried to. So everybody staying up the entire game. But yeah, man, just so many cool memories from that. Talk about the fog coming down, like frozen, and they turned the lights off at the stadium after the game. Just awesome. Like, I mean, just, and really, I think gave in that moment, that entire season just gave Baylor fans the confidence of like, we don't have to go back to where we were. Like, we can go beyond everything that we ever did or ever imagined. Even in the Grant Teaff era, we could go surpass all of that. And now there's been ups and downs since that moment, but I think Baylor fans in general realize we can get back to that, and the commitment is absolutely there to get back to that.
Right. And obviously it turns into case closed is the name of this game. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just kind of the blueprint of, kind of where Baylor wants to get back to, winning a game like that with the Big 12 championship on the line. And, Baylor's done it. 2021, they did it, obviously, in the Big 12 title game. But I just think like this moment was just something that just was this culmination of what the program was getting to. And it was kind of the beginning, right? It was like, I mean, I know you could say, the Heisman year, the 2012 year, but this was the first year where it was like, here's what we can achieve. And here's what you can achieve if this keeps going the way that it is. And you win a Big 12 championship. I don't remember exactly where they finished ranking wise before the UCF game, but ranked pretty highly, obviously laid an egg in the Fiesta Bowl. But I think in general, it just was such a special game, a special moment, and something that I think Baylor fans will remember forever. And that's going to be so cool to celebrate on Saturday.
Yeah. I think Baylor had those 2013, 2014 postseasons after the Big 12 championships were won. Scheduling against UCF did that team no favors. Like, they wanted a chance at a big dog, right? Like, they wanted that opportunity. I think that really hurt them in that game. They came out flat. All the Browse to Texas rumors were out there. And then in 14, you talk about the Cotton Bowl in a game like almost a perfect storm of like, we want to play this game. We're excited, but we missed the playoffs. But now we're going to get up and be pissed off for, however many minutes of the game and get up to a massive lead and then just completely collapse. And so like the postseasons, the bowl games of those seasons were rough, but you can't take away from what that team would actually do. And really cool now that we are 10 years later with the blackout, Baylor team wearing black this weekend, anthracite, to be politically correct. But it's, you want Dave Aranda to be able to get back to that. He did it in 21. You want this program to reach that pinnacle again. And they're kind of on that track. And that's where we are going into this weekend. And it's a really cool opportunity to look back to where they were in those moments and now to look forward and say, hey, can we get back there? And this is a big starting point for that. Obviously, winning 2 games in a row. Now you have TCU, who is that hated rival for so long, especially in that era from 2010, 2011, 2015. And to get back to winning those games against TCU would be absolutely massive in achieving that. And obviously, I think the Jake Spavital offense is a great time for this particular game as well. A lot of things that are really cool and symmetrical to what those couple of years looked like that we will celebrate. So any final thoughts on these 5 games or just in those 2013, 2014 championship teams?
Well, I just think, we look at kind of where Baylor is at right now. And like you said, this could be the 2012. This could be the 2012 year. It could be. I mean, next year, you get Sora Robertson back. You feel like there's this momentum shift right now going on with the program. I mean, if they beat TCU on Saturday, I mean, it's not crazy to think that they could win out. I mean, it's possible. Like, they'll probably be favored in every game except for the West Virginia game. And I bet that will be a very narrow spread. So I just think in general that this is a great time for fans to remember and celebrate the 2013, 2014 teams, but also get to McLean Stadium and cheer on this current version of the team. Cause you never know. I know a lot of people were out on this staff and just kind of, wrote this season off after last year. But I think they've proven enough over the last 2 weeks that, hey, there's maybe something here. And so I hope that Baylor fans really do give this team a chance on Saturday. Come celebrate those 2 storied years that Baylor had and really give them the appreciation that they definitely deserve, but also turn right around and cheer on this team that has a great chance to, again, continue building momentum. And that's what a program like Baylor is looking for, to try to get momentum and then build some consistency.
Absolutely. 4-4 on the season, have a chance to start with another win or get 3 in a row to lead to the final 3. So, all right, Baylor fans, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside Baylor Sports. Appreciate each and every one of you for listening. A great bonus episode here. This was Grayson's idea, by the way. So if you want to give anybody credit, it was Grayson's. And appreciate all of you listening. Have a great game weekend, and we look forward to hearing or speaking with you, hopefully after another win next weekend. Or next Monday, And then obviously basketball season, dude, it's right here. We just talked about that. So don't forget about that. Basketball season starts on Monday, late night game against Gonzaga. And so if we don't talk to you before then, we look forward to doing it again on Monday. So thank you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.